Hi, everybody. Welcome to Andy's Licorice Talk. This will be our 28th and finale episode. We still would appreciate it if you would like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do hope to have some encores of people that we had scheduled in for various COVID-related reasons. We were unable to realize. We have a few extra projects coming. We'll probably have some highlights reels, and we'll probably play the series all over again because our marketing techniques had changed, had evolved during the series, and some of the early interviews are really well worth watching. Anyway, we couldn't think of a more fitting finale guest than the one and only Eddie Daniels. Welcome, Eddie.
Hi.
Eddie, welcome.
Great to see you. Great to see you.
Likewise. Well, I usually start by how I know the guest, and I have to say, I'm going out on a limb. He's probably the person of all the guests that I owe the most to. And this is fun because it takes us back to the kind of old clarinet days. You know, I was a student of Leon Rushinov's, who's been mentioned a few times on the show, and he had sort of a clarinet central store. All the visiting clarinetists from New York would go there, and all the guys and gals in New York would come there and try mouthpieces. And his student Mike Contaxis, when Rushinov's business went out of business, stopped. His student created the new sort of clarinet central. You remember Eddie, and he was a repair guy, and you go in there and you run into whoever. You run into Eddie Daniels or Stanley Drucker or whoever back in the day. So I went in there, and who shows up but Eddie Daniels himself, and he just takes out an old buffet mouthpiece blank. And he just says, I've been working on this a little bit. And I said, let me try that, And I tried to say, oh, this is all right. This is all right. So I handed him $50. Okay, back then it was, and with that mouthpiece, the next month, I used it to audition for my job here. 32 years later, I'm sitting here in Hong Kong interviewing Eddie Daniels from, in New Mexico. And I'm very appreciative, Eddie, because you might remember I signed the contract saying I'd have to give you 50% of my salary if I ever won a job on your mouthpiece. And you never went there. So thank you so much.
I'm going there tonight. No, I'm not. It's okay. Anyway, that was an interesting time because I was starting to work on mouthpieces. I used to go to Everett Matson's out in Oceanport, New Jersey, once a week or whatever, and you'd meet a lot of guys there on occasion. But he was such a sweet man, and I was just in awe of him. And we'd go there, and I'd look in his case, and he had a Selmer mouthpiece of his own. He was such a sweet man. I said, Everett, Matt, what's that mouthpiece in your case? It was always a setup. It was a setup because he would give it to you. He was such a generous guy that, that's like all of us. Somebody, your teacher or someone you respect has this mouthpiece in this case, and you kind of want it, and it's his because it's got to be the best if it's Matt's mouthpiece. He just gave me the mouthpiece, and I won the Hong Kong Symphony with it. I forgot to tell you, you're out.
Well, here's my question for you. Are you still futzing with mouthpieces?
No, I stopped doing it. After a while, it just gets, it's the hair difference, between this and that and the feel, and you finally get to know the feel you like. But Richard Hawkins is one of my dear friends, and I look to him if I want to have anything done on a mouthpiece. He's got chops. He's doing it all the time. It's not the kind of thing you just, I think I'll scrape this. There's some basic things I can do, but it takes time, and then you get something you like, and then you don't like it again, and you start. It's a crazy thing to do, and I know some guys who during performances who may even be watching, Frank, who would reface a mouthpiece.
Yes,
in the middle of a gig.
Yeah. No, that was mentioned during his interview that he changed the mouthpiece in the middle of a gig to match the reed. I mean, whatever, right? Whatever works. Actually, before we go on, we need to introduce our phenomenal, number one, bass clarinetist. Number two, techie guy. Number 3, wonderful poster maker. And he needs to get a credit. This is, of course, our beloved Lorenzo. And we need to mention him because it's not just that I have an interesting way of meeting Eddie, but also Lorenzo has a backstory. How did you first meet Eddie?
Yeah, I met him when he came to play Copland Clarinet Concerto in the London Symphony Orchestra. And Christian Järvi was the conductor. At the end of the dress rehearsal, he said, well, by the way, we're going to do a little encore. And, Eddie's going to improvise. And then he looked at the clarinet section and he said, who wants to improvise with him? And Andrew Mariner, he made like...
He pointed to...
like, he's doing it. So, and then it was actually quite fun because with the bass clarinet, and it was like we were communicating. And
I remember right before that performance, because it wasn't like playing the Copland with one orchestra after the other every week. It was like travel to London, come to play the Copland, and it scared the you-know-what out of me. So I remember being in the dressing room backstage. I'm frightened. I'm scared, And so there were a lot of people around me. Some of the guys, Järvi might have been there, and my wife. And I said, everybody out of my dressing room. And I bunched up my coat so that I could use it as a cushion to meditate on. So I sat on the floor, followed my breathing, and just came to a place where when I walked out, I was more relaxed then than I even am now, and I'm pretty relaxed. So it just so helped me, because if I had to just go out and play in the way that I felt, first note of the Copland, you don't want to screw up the first note, a pianissimo, a beautiful sound. It's just, it's not great. So I was so relaxed that even if I didn't have to do the gig, I felt great.
Okay, now, Eddie, I'm not going to let you go any further. I have all these notes, but this is very, very impressive. I mean, I've been following your career, I don't know for how long, 40 years, okay? And it's never, in fact, this was a question I put down. I said, no, cross it out. It's never occurred to me that you ever have gotten nervous. Now you got to talk about this right now. You do get nervous, and what do you do? What makes you nervous, and what do you do to deal with it?
Well, it's because you're going to play and you have one moment, and that's it. At that time, you have the moment. It's a very heightened moment. It depends on the kind of gig. The Copland is one thing. That's a little more frightening because it's a long introduction. When I get to the cadenza, I'm cool. By the time I get to the cadenza, it's like, hey, this is my territory, I even add things to it, but when I go out and play jazz, there's a little high. It's always like with the clarinet, you never know what it's going to sound like. Even if you warm up, it's always that first moment out on stage. And Dick Waller, I don't know if you know Dick. Dick Waller was principal clarinet in Cincinnati for years. He's a dear friend. One of his tips to me, and that he does himself, is before you play, before the audience comes in, check your reeds on that stage so that you're not surprised when you come out, because you're warming up in a dressing room and the lights are hot and the reed starts getting dry, or the room might be cold. And then you walk out into a stage that could be warm or cold and you don't know what to expect. So I, would always do that. Go out before, so at least some of the parameters of what you're going to sound like when you start playing. But I wouldn't say, it's just your heart rate. It's a heightened moment. It's a great moment. All of us know what it's like to have to go out there. It's not like falling off a log, even though we've been practicing for 100 years. It means something to us. And it's great that it has that kind of meaning, that it's almost like what you say and how you treat the people you love and how you talk to them is so important. And how you play music is so important, and kind of how you want to sound so that you're happy with yourself, and then the audience can then be more relaxed. My wife Mirabai, she used to watch me in the early days when I didn't play classical music in front of people, and she would get nervous for me because she knew my temperament. And then now she doesn't get nervous. So now I don't get nervous because she doesn't get nervous, but she's not getting nervous because I'm not getting nervous. So it's a nice little...
amazing.
Yeah. But that moment, The moment of silence, to have that before you have a performance. So getting all those people out of the dressing room, my heart was racing. It's not every day that you go play the Copeland with the London Symphony, you know, and Yarvi. And Christian is a dear friend of mine. I love him. He's really great. He's supportive. He's a lot of fun to be with. But I was just breathing. All I did was breathe. And I came into my own space and I realized, God, I got up from the floor and I was another person, you know?
Well, very valuable. Thanks. Before we go on, you could probably see, but just we have people saying hello from Brazil, from Greece. We've got John Brussier from the Chicago Symphony. We've got Charlie Neidig and Ayako from New York, all sending their love. Arizona, you name it, all around the world already. Maury Bakun from Canada saying hello.
Yeah.
So anyway,
you know, it's like we're all mishpacha, we're all family, because we all are dealing with this instrument that is it's a different thing. I'm playing a lot of the flute lately just because I had to for the last album, and I just realized the flute's not an easy instrument, but it's a little easier than the clarinet. There are a lot of things you don't have to deal with the flute. That on the clarinet is a maverick. You know, a great clarinet player named Johnny Mintz. He was a genius, a jazz kind of Benny Goodman era clarinetist. And his story he would tell, you know, he said he had the case open and he just closed the case and he said to the clarinet, "You win."
No, listen, Eddie. As I told you, we've had two other jazz players on the show, Anand Cohen and Paquito de Rivera. They all were doing sax, and we'll get into this kind of evolution about the clarinet and jazz later. But all of them, this is especially Paquito. He said the clarinet. His theory is it was created by five guys who never met each other. The clarinet's so hard.
Yeah.
You know, now. What is it about the clarinet? You play sax, you play flute. What is it? Is it that it's in 12ths, or what is it that makes the clarinet a little bit more difficult?
No, it's not a fingering issue for me. I love it. It's right under your fingers. It's right there. If you keep your fingers close to the keyboard, it's, you know, pianists have to lift their hands up and hope that they come down in the right place. Our fingers are pretty much home. You know,
Okay.
it's really, you know, for me, it's like wanting to find the voice that's my voice, you know, so that I'm identifiable and that it matches my heart, so that when I'm playing, what's coming out is really me. And that's why we all play music, every instrument. It's so that when you play, you're matching what your heart is feeling. And in jazz, we have a little bit more opportunity to do that than in classical music, although Copeland concerto, when you get to cadenza, you can play around with it. You get to, in cadenzas and Mozart, you can play around, but you can't play around too much, you know, because it's really more, it has its frame. In jazz, you can do whatever you want, but sometimes whatever you want doesn't really match what you really feel, you know, so you have to kind of, it's really a game you're playing with yourself, and it's a meditation, and you find what you're feeling within your own limitations. And some people say, well, what are you trying to say on your instrument? I'm not trying to say anything. I'm trying to be something, to be what the clarinet feels, you know, it's almost like, I speak about this to students on occasion, the gesture. In classical music, it could be a turn, da 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 da. That's a gesture. And in jazz, you know, and those are pretty regulated, but you want to do them beautiful, and sometimes you want to do them like your teacher did it. And in jazz, the gesture is much larger. The gesture for expressing love and hope and anger. Anger is allowed in jazz. Anger in the second movement of the Mozart is not, that's verboten. You're not allowed to get angry. But in jazz, it's accepted. And sometimes the audience like it when they feel ferocity and they feel your passion. But then when they feel your spirit and your softness and something beautiful about the connection in your heart, they feel that too. So that gesture has a little bit of a wider berth than the gesture of playing Mozart. And the way you want to articulate, it's more defined in a way.
Mm-hmm. But why? That's very, very enlightening and terrific. But again, why the clarinet? It seems that people are picking on as a more difficult way to express that than, say, the flute or the sax.
Well, I think the clarinet is more restricted. It's held together. And when you want to jump out, even in jazz, if you're permitted, let's say you're in this environment, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't want to jump out. Like a saxophone, you can go, wah. Clarinet, you go, wah. And it'll go, I don't want to do it anymore. I only want to go, ooh, you know? So you have to make your way with this instrument. You're making a deal. Not with the devil, but you're making a deal with the instrument that you coax it and you want to pull beauty out of it and have it be with you. And you don't want to assault it too much because it is a very fine woman. I think of the clarinet as more feminine. Yeah.
Interesting. In fact, it's so funny. I have all these questions, and this is how it always goes. I always call these interviews jazz solos. They are what they are, and we go in the direction. And so here's my next question. You're talking about Mozart, and then you're talking about wah on the saxophone. Now, equally, when you just talk about doing the Copeland concerto, so you go on YouTube and I can see 100 performances of you with a microphone in a smallish place with 4 or 5 people behind you, and then you're talking about doing Mozart with an orchestra in a hall of 2,000 or whatever, or Copeland. How about your equipment? Do you actually, in order to project or get different colors, is it different playing in front of a microphone doing or projecting?
No, I play the same equipment all the time. It's a fairly close mouthpiece. I studied with Bonnard, and I studied with Vincent Abato before Bonnard, and Bernard Portnoy and Joe Allard. And basically, when I was using more open mouthpieces that would go wah easily on the clarinet, they sounded tinny. They didn't have the sound and the warmth that I wanted. And so I kind of went back to my kind of classical embouchure, and where it's held together and I can loosen it up a little bit and coax it out and not scream. Meanwhile, more open mouthpieces, you can scream more, you've got more latitude. But I, with my jaw, underbite, I can't control more open mouthpieces. So I generally, on saxophone and on the clarinet, I play more moderate facings.
Well, now I'm so glad that you mentioned some of those people, because a big part of this show is not only documenting, terrific stars like yourself for the future, but also your connection to the guys in the past. So we can't let you get away with mentioning those 4 guys without talking a little bit about the first question I have for you is about Bonnard, and I want to tell you what I heard from Robert Marcellus, another name from the past. He used to be known as a teacher to charge quite a lot of money. And what he said was that it's actually a productive thing, because he believed if he charged a lot of money, you're going to remember more, okay, of the lesson. And he said he studied with Bonnard, and Bonnard charged in those days something like $35 an hour, which was a fortune. And that was his mentality. Is any truth to any of this?
No, I used to study with Bonnard when I was in high school, my last year of high school. And he was right across the street from Radio City Musical in the Wayland Drug Building. It was a drugstore, and above, Joe Allard had his studio, and you could look down. It was just the second floor. And Bonnard used Joe's studio. So there I was going to take a lesson with Bonnard once a week. I think it was $15. It was not outrageous at all. And it was fun sitting there as a high school student, and the guys would come in from Juilliard, and you'd look in their cases to see, the cases were open. They're playing on a mouthpiece, on a Bonnard mouthpiece, which was a Lalonde, pretty good mouthpiece, but not faced really well. But for their lessons, they had to play on the Bonnard mouthpiece. And in the case, I did take a look once. I could see a Selmer HS star in a bunch of their cases. So when they were having fun and doing what they really want to do, they put the Bonnat mouthpiece aside and then played their Selmer mouthpiece. And Bonnat was great. He was a lot of fun and yeah. So I didn't start even.
If you had to sum up one or two things that he gave you, or that you think about still, what would you say you got
fingers,
from
the legato of the fingers, kind of coming down. First, I think Rose 40, da da dee da da do da da dee, and you're not just clunking with the fingers. It was, and Jimmy Abato worked with me on that too. That seemed, how to make a legato, and who thinks of legato with fingers? People just blow the air, and if you have a really soft reed, the notes will come out. But if you want a darker sound, then you have to work the legato in a little bit of a different way because you have a little bit more resistance. And so I think that was the thing that was great. Just having him pick it up. He'll just pick up your setup, which, by the way, he was French, and it wasn't always fun to take the mouthpiece back into my mouth after he played it, because he wasn't sensitive about mouthwash and cleaning and wiping the mouthpiece like we all are now. And so Bernard would give me the clarinet back, and I'd put it in my mouth. And I loved him, but it was a whole different feeling in my mouth after he'd do that. But just hear it, he'd just pick it up. He would just, for a second, he just, it's nothing. Just, it's nothing. His fingers would go flying all over the place, and it was nothing to him, And so it was nice to see him do that. I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying about what it was like to put that mouthpiece in my mouth after that, but that's kind of, I'm giving you the lowdown.
Yeah. No, please. Now you mentioned Rose 40 and I myself am very curious. I'll tell you why. I studied with Rushinoff, and I almost studied with Joe Allard, and I've heard so many wonderful things about him. One of our guests, also John Ye, who's listening, also was a student of his, and everyone who I talked to, that's what Allard had you play. Dee da dee da da. So could you tell me a little bit what I missed out on? I everyone says great things about Allard. What did he give you? What did Allard give you as a teacher?
Oh, Allard was Joe was a personality. My story about Joe was, I had a cigar cutter Selmer Alto, and I wasn't sure about it if I should keep it or not. And I hadn't met Joe at all. So I went to 48th Street. I'm thinking, what do I do with this saxophone? I'm not sure whether I should get rid of it or not. And there's Joe Allard's studio. He's up there teaching. So I went up to that second floor in the building, and he wasn't teaching. I said, "Are you Joe Allard?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Come on in." And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about this. I've got this cigar cutter Alto," which the cigar cutter was this little thing in the register key and the octave key that looked like a cigar cutter. And it was one of the classic old altos that Selmer made. And so I walk up, I come up, he said, "Take out your horn." Before you know it, I forgot that I wanted to get rid of that saxophone. He gave me the lesson of my life on how to not impinge upon the reed and let it vibrate. And from that point in, I walked out. He didn't even charge me. I fell in love with him as a human being, as such a sweet, open, he became your father, you just had a connection with him. And, and he'd say son, or he'd say Ed, and it's just such a contrast to Jimmy Abato or to Bonnat, who was a little more serious. But Joe was, he was a friend, and he'd pick up your instrument and he'd just make the biggest, most vibrant sound you ever heard in your life. And it was just so astounding. I didn't sell that alto till, 15, 20 years later. But I learned just that. And then I started to just come in and see him once a week or once every couple of weeks. And every time he would pick something. He wasn't like a interpretive, how would you play this melody? He'd see what you were doing. He said, you could relax this part of your upper lip and not bring it down so hard onto the mouthpiece. so that and he would say, so that it felt like mom's apple pie. Mom's apple pie, the end of the apple pie, the crust had the way that it just melted over the dish. And he said, you want your lip to be like that. Now, other people teach differently. And so, just that attitude to prevent you from just impinging on the reed. His whole thing was about letting the reed vibrate, but having control over it. So that was that, an image like that, make your lip like mom's apple pie, and that just was, that was a gift, that was my first lesson. And, it was just so wonderful.
I want to move to, because I have a small connection with them, to Vincent Abato, known as Jimmy. He was actually, for those of you that saw, we had a little tribute to, we had some colleagues pass away earlier this year from the Met, Jim Anyabene and Joe Allard. And we had a little tribute to them. But Jim Anyabene's predecessor, of course, was Jimmy Abato. And when I was a student at Juilliard, he actually had a bass clarinet class. So I got to know him a little bit. And I want you to talk a bit about him. But before you go on, I have something to share with you. And Charlie and Ayako, who are listening, are part of this. Ayako teaches at Hart School of Music, and I gave a master class there a few years ago, and really a lovely student there, college age, met me and clarinet student, and met me, and we talked, and she adds me to Facebook, and I see she adds me to Facebook, and I get on her picture. Well, there she is. She's a tiny baby in the picture, and Abato is serenading her. It's her great grandfather. So his great granddaughter is actually a master's clarinet student at Mannes College of Music right now with Charlie and Ayaka. So I was quite moved because he was a teacher of mine, and she's his great granddaughter. So it was really cool. So tell us about him.
All right. So I was 13. And I had studied with Portnoy before that. And he says, I want you to go to Jimmy. And so he set it up. Very scary for me because Jimmy Abato, he could play the dickens out of the clarinet. He could single tongue faster than anybody. Beautiful, beautiful player. Going to a lesson and playing for him when I was 13, and I'm going to let all of the viewers just soak this in a little bit. He'd put his feet up on a stool, and he'd say, play for me, kid. And my father's there. And I'd be bordering on tears because, it wasn't nothing like Joe Allard, which was later. Even Portnoy was a little bit of a sweeter person. Jimmy was like a little slightly, let me see what you could do. Hey, play for me. And one time, I remember, I just said, I've had it with this guy. He gave me the exercise in that rose book, and I came in. And I was 13, and he fell off his chair, and I just had to show him that I could do it, and give him a little bit of a little push at the same time.
I love it.
And from that point on, I wasn't scared anymore. And plus, having your father come to your lessons with you, even though my father was a sweet guy, he was relaxed, but the lessons were $10 with Jimmy back then. I was 13. I'm now 79. So I'm born in 41, so that was like 54. 1954, $10 a lesson. And my father was it was a coat and suit cutter for this company, for Pariah Brothers. And the famous pianist Pariah was the son of Pariah Brothers. And so my father would bring a coat for Jimmy's wife as a gift every once in a while, something as a gift to Jimmy, like bringing flowers to him. Anyway, I did get a lot because hearing this guy play with this immaculate technique that he had, and he made me do a lot of things. He made me memorize the closé scales, and as I started getting technique, then he said, I got to send you to Bonat. I can't teach you anymore. You know too much. can play that G major roast thing now, and so I went to Bonad, who was much more relaxed, and the whole scene was different. We all grow up as little kids in this scene,
Okay, and then and let's go back to actually one of our previous guests who's watching, Frank Cohen, was a fellow classmate of yours at Juilliard and also studied with Portnoy. So tell us a little bit about Portnoy.
Portnoy was just a lovely guy. I liked hearing him play some things. You fall in love with whoever's your teacher at the time. I wasn't, they become your guru. And so I liked him a lot. He was playing in My Fair Lady at the time. He was in the pit of My Fair Lady when I was studying with him. And he was on 90th Street and Broadway in that building. I think that was 90th Street. And I lived later in life, before I moved out to Santa Fe, New Mexico, I lived on 89th and Broadway, right at catty corner across from that building where I used to go as a 13-year-old to take lessons with Bernie Portnoy. I liked him. He wasn't like Joe had really a magic. Not as a player. People. You fall in love with people. Bonad had his own magic, and yeah.
Great. Well, anyway, you don't get to just say, "Oh, when I moved to New Mexico." I want to know, when I was 18 years old, I first heard you, I think, at Leon Rushinov's master classes in the 92nd Street Y, and I used to go. I used to go to Herbie Kleeman, the repairman, remember, in New Jersey, and he'd say, "Listen, Eddie Daniels is playing at a jazz club." I didn't know anything. I just moved to New York. You got to hear this guy, and I'd hear you in the jazz clubs. I'd hear you at Rushinov's. And then, you were doing movies and you were doing pop music and you were touring. I mean, you were the king of the hill in the New York scene. And out of nowhere, I mean, I just want to know, as a college kid, everyone was so impressed with your career. What made you just leave New York and move to New Mexico? What's that all about?
Well, I was 50.
Yeah.
The scene had changed. But I want to mention Leon because I don't want to bypass Leon. I love Leon Rushinov. I never studied with him. Never took a lesson. And it just shows that he was a mensch. He was like most of the guys back then. Weber was one of the great teachers. A lot of people went to him. But they were competitive with each other, and if you studied with Leon and Weber found that out, and then you went and took a lesson with him, he didn't like that. They were all like, it was like, it's just a whole other kind of competitive scene amongst them. Leon Rushinovs was the sweetest guy. He was so supportive of me, in spite of the fact that I never took a lesson with him, not once. And I remember going into the store, and I still have this case he gave me, that put 2 mouthpieces in. I'd go up and try mouthpieces, and he came down once and he said, "I was wondering who that was. Oh God, it's you. I love the way you sound." Now, most teachers would say, "Well, who are you studying with?" And, find something to maybe make you want to come to them. And Leon was just an open-hearted sweetheart of a guy. And the fact that he'd come down and say, what a sound. I never heard a sound like that. How beautiful. And so that made me just like the guy, the heart that he had. And then he gave me this case as a gift when I was up in the store. I could go in my room and show it to you. It's just like, a 2 mouthpiece kind of case, nice, that I've kept all my life as a thing because of that,
Just as an aside, a lot of our after this, of course, we're going to discuss the series a little bit. And we have quite a few of the old guests coming. A lot of them are Rushinov students, as I was. And I'm just doing the math as you're talking. I think this is the 30th anniversary of his death, Leon Rushinov.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm pretty sure give and take a few months. So it just occurred to me. So thank you so much for, I know Michelle had some lessons with him. Frank was definitely a student of his. Charlie Neidig was. I studied with him for over 6 years. So thank you so much for mentioning him, especially in that light as a non-student. Yeah.
And he was very, very creative with his students. Look at the great players you just mentioned and spent time with them. And he was not a virtuoso. He'd pick up the clarinet, he could play it, he could sound good, but that wasn't his thing. He could look at you and say, well, what was your experience? Since I gave you something, what would you say about Leon what did he do for you?
Well, very. It's funny. Just along, I was going to finish your sentence the way he would have. He says that Stanley Drucker told him he was the best player in the world for 2 notes, and it's true. He could pick up. He would play. Come on, what's the matter with your embouchure? He'd pick it up, and it sounded terrific. And and then he'd play another. It sounded terrific. No, but I mean, he was, of course, everyone knows. First of all, a great psychologist.
Yes.
And he actually, in fact, I'm going to ask you in a minute, he made all of us, of course, sports psychology has moved ahead a lot, but in those days, and people still read it, the inner game of tennis, right? And he would make us read it. And what I remember, he actually has some books. It was fascinating. He has a whole page where he gives you instructions to follow. He says, move your index finger, bend your elbow, lift this up, and it goes on. And then he turns the page, touch your nose. Okay, so he was giving you exact instructions how to touch your nose, and it was very confusing. But if it's the same thing, I know you're a tennis fan, aren't you, and a player?
Yeah. And also, he was kind of doing Alexander technique with you too. That kind of Alexander, where he's very knowledgeable about the physical and watching how your body is. In other words, it's not just putting your mouthpiece in a face and blowing. What's your shoulder doing? What's your knee doing? Whatever, like you said. Yeah.
No, he was perfect. So let me ask you, I know along his lines, I know that you're a big believer in your music actually, your music actually grows if you grow as a person. I've seen some interviews, and you talk about that. I'm very curious during this period now. It's been 9 months. A, what have you been doing? And B, have you learned anything about yourself, or have you actually grown in some ways as a person and perhaps musically as well?
Well, I mean, COVID brings up a lot for all of us. It's the fear of death, which is the primal fear that every human being has. And so I'm a meditator. I was a Zen student for a lot of years, and sat on a cushion on the floor with a lot of other people and did retreats and stuff. And now I'm kind of by myself here in New Mexico. There's a Zen place, but I sit alone. And the whole fear of your possibility of getting COVID and dying, and especially if you're older, as I am, makes me work on that. I look at it as a gift, that every single thing that you don't like means you need to look at that. So I've been watching myself. A couple of weeks ago for this, you won't believe this. This is interesting because it relates to this. The cork on my mouthpiece was coming apart, and I called Maury and I said, the cork is coming apart, but I don't want to go to Albuquerque, drive 3 hours just to put a cork on. He says, let me see it. And I held it up to Maury over the phone on my Facebook. And he says, go get some, rubber cement or contact cement. So that week I had been to my regular doctor, which, I don't want to go out of the house, but sometimes you got to go get checked, And I had like an ingrown toenail that's been killing me for like months. I said, I got to go to the foot doctor. I went to him. And then on Sunday, I said, this cork is bugging me. I better get some contact cement. Maury said, well, do it online. It would take like a week. And I didn't want to ruin the cork. And this relates to you because I thought, well, maybe I'll have to play, and I don't want the cork to be for plunging, So I go to a hardware store where there's hardly anyone in, and we're doing distancing, and this kid walks me through the aisle, and then I'm out of there, and I run out to the car, and I said to myself, why did I do that? I added a whole other level of, in a store that I don't know any of those people, and I walked in and I walked out, and maybe I stood in front of this kid for a little bit too long. So it brought up that fear, which caused me to meditate about my fear, because we're all going to be there one day. But I fixed the cork. It's right here. Or he told me so adeptly. Put it on both sides, on the mouthpiece and then the cork, and then wait 20 minutes to it to dry. And that's now the best cork that I've ever had. Thanks, Maury. And so, but then I thought, why did I do that? So I watched I grizhed myself. Grizhed, like the Jewish term where you're like Why did I do that? Why did I add that? You know, one of the other stores I went to, we went to Whole Foods to buy food for the house. So you're amongst people, they're very rigid in there. You got a social distance. And yet, so they're breathing all around you, you know? And so I got scared, and after like meditating on it for a week, I got tested and I was negative. You know, so we all live in this whole other environment. And also what really, really gets me in my heart is that while we're talking, people are dying. Yeah. Right now. You know, they say like every 30 seconds, someone's passing away. And that's just in the States. So it brings tears to my eyes. So I have to put that in my meditation in the morning, that I'm just thinking about the guys who are, which could be me. And I know what that, the fear of that could be on a, you know, in a hallway now, because they have no room for people in hospitals now. And someone gets COVID and they're feeling symptoms and they're scared, really scared. So that's what the learning is. We have to learn to have more compassion, not just, oh, I don't have it, so it doesn't matter. Forget about it. You know, people who have done the right thing are getting sick. So it's about.
I love the fact that you say we're actually thinking about other people. I was very moved. Wynton Marsalis's father died early in the year, Ellis, of COVID, and he talked about it. And what he said was, and I was very moved by this. He knew his father was going to die at the end, and he was expressing his remorse to him. And his father kind of scolded him. He says, "What's so special about you? You know, a lot of people are dying right now. A lot of people are losing their parents. You know, stop feeling sorry for yourself." Kind of message. I mean, everyone's going, or a lot of people are going through this, unfortunately. And please keep that in mind. You know, I thought that was quite profound. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm wondering, Eddie. So, well, okay. I still want to know. You left at 50 years old, New York. You were the king of the hill. And why New Mexico? And what have you been doing in New Mexico for the last, 30 years?
Well, I've been playing at high altitude at 7,200 feet above sea level. And a lot of my colleagues say, why did you move that? It just makes your life terrible. You know, you got to deal with reason, like it's above Denver. Denver's 5,000 and I'm 2,500 feet above that. And you know why did they do it? Because when I look out our window, it's beautiful, it's quiet. We live on 15 acres. Wow. And, you know, and it's the house we built. And I had lived in New York for 50 years. You know, my life was in New York and I loved it. And it was a great place. But we came here as a summer vacation one time and rented a house that was, I rented it from Toby Apple, this very fine violinist, violist who taught at Juilliard. So he rented us his house and we did it a summer, and then we found another house. And then at the end of that summer, I said, let's move here. Let's find a house. And we did. And, you know, on 5 acres, you know, for what would be considered pretty cheap nowadays. And we just wanted a change of life so that the outside world could give me something that would be calming. So when I look out at the mountains and the beauty while I'm practicing, it adds to it. You know, you could still do that in the city, but it's a little more helpful having a beautiful surrounding, you know?
Right. Oh, by the way, and you mentioned before, so I just want to thank Eddie, of course, is a Raccoon artist, as was David Schifrin, one of our previous guests. And Maury's been literally one of the most supportive viewers of this show and helped us get in touch with Eddie Davis. And he's making a lot of smart aleck comments, so we'll ignore them for now. But we know it's all with love.
Next time, maybe send me the glue. Send me the glue next time, Maury. Okay.
But can you tell us a little bit? Because as a kid, I understand the studio scene has changed a lot. But as a kid, as a sort of 18-year-old, following you at the time when you were sort of at the height in New York, I was fascinated by, as you said, the studio scene. And I know that, I mean, you were talking a little bit about you did some like pop music, you did Sister Sledge, and you did an alto solo, and they didn't even listen. You didn't even listen to the song. They said, "Okay, go." You know, and you didn't know what to expect, and you had your alto and you do it. And
it's funny you say that, because that record became a hit. Right. And the tune, I played a tenor solo on one of those, and it was just me walking in a small room, and they put the track on, and I played a tenor solo, and it was you could go to YouTube and listen to it. The tune is "Gotta Love Somebody." Gotta love somebody.
One of the few alto solos that are
Yeah,
documented.
yeah, and the other tune was "Reach Your Peak." So they said, "Bring your alto and your tenor." So the "Reach Your Peak" is on the same record. You could go to YouTube and hear both of those solos, in which I walked into a room, I listened to a track, I surrendered to the track with my own personality of what I could find. That tune, "Gotta Love Somebody," became a hit tune. I didn't get any extra money for it. It was kind of like Phil Woods being on a Billy Joel thing at that time.
Oh, too bad. I love that. I love that.
Extra for that, and so, but it became a kind of thing where my wife and I at the time, we were visiting St. Martin, in the Caribbean. And we're just driving through this town, and I'm hearing my tenor solo being broadcasted because Sister Sledge was such a pop item, and I'm listening to the tenor solo blasted through the town. They didn't know I was there, and that was kind of that. You just never know what you say, what you do, where it can come back to you.
Sorry, Eddie, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just saying, everyone who's listening could go to YouTube and bring up Sister Sledge, "Gotta Love Somebody," and "Reach Your Peak," the two separate songs, and you'll hear me in a booth making up something, so I sound like I'm with them. And that was the art of the studio player back then, so that, Gordon Goodwin's had me play on a lot of his tunes on his records, and I'd go to a studio here and put it on as an overdub. But there's an art to falling into the track so nobody would ever suspect that you were doing that you play with them. You end up really playing, and I'm improvising, so that's a different kind of thing. When I was a kid, I don't know if you knew them. There were two horn players who were really active in the studio scene called they were brothers, the Burv brothers. And of course, but when I entered university, they were already now older, and they talked about the studio scene because they were called on the Star Trek theme. The original is Star Trek, da dee da 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 da. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, you were!" And they'd say, "No, look, we did 5 of these things a day. You didn't know it's hit or miss. You win, and now they're these horn icons, but they were just doing what they always did." What was the studio? What was your like? You weren't just a studio guy though. You were doing like solo jazz stuff. I see you in the clubs. You tour, and then you go in with your saxophone, as you just say, playing 70s pop music. What was Was there a typical day for you? What was a typical week for you? Well, the scene changed. In the early, maybe it was the 80s, where you could be in an ensemble, actually be sitting with other guys next to you. I'd have Lou Marini on one side, Michael Brecker on another side, I'd have to either play what the call was, either clarinet, flute, piccolo, bring your bass clarinet. Sometimes you're running through the streets with instruments under your arm, and you could kill yourself doing it, and then running with it to catch a cab to go to that studio, and you don't know what you're going to get when you walk in. But hopefully some of your buddies were there that you'd be playing with. I remember playing with Julie Baker on a date where I was playing second flute to him on a date, and he liked the flute I was playing. There was something about it, either what I was getting out of it, and I had studied with him a couple of years before, and he followed me home from 48th Street to 89th and Broadway. We went up to my apartment. I'm thrilled. I'm working with Julius Baker. He's like the mother of all flute players. He said, "Let me try that flute." He wanted to buy it from me. It was an old Haynes flute. He sat on my radiator and played Flight of the Bumblebee down to low B like a cannon. It was totally unbelievable. If I hadn't met him on that date, I would not have had that beautiful connection with him. And then a couple of weeks later, he hired me. He says, "I got a gig for you, and there's like I need like a jazz clarinet. I heard you do the Calandrelli concerto for jazz clarinet. Would you do it in Connecticut at this festival?" So I did. So Julie then actually hired me to be a clarinet soloist at this place in New Haven or wherever it was, and everything grows from everything, every connection you make. And I get so many questions from students, what should I do to break into it? Well, there's no it to break into anymore. But if there were, you practice your buns off so that you even like your playing, and you start showing it around, and people say, hey, there's this guy, you should go hear him, and my friend Lawrence Feldman said, you got to hear Brecker. Let's go hear Michael. We went to this little club that I used to play at on occasion and listened to Michael Brecker, and it just like killed me how great he sounded, and watching him, and so we all are part of each other's being.
I just want to address, speaking of crazy connections, two of the legends you've mentioned. First of all, a very old friend of mine in Hastings on the Hudson, he's a doctor tuning in right now, is mentioning, which I know for a fact is true because his daughter was his babysitter. Michael Brecker lived right across the street from Hastings on the Hudson, my hometown. And I want to segue, and we're going to use your own stories to do it. Julie Baker, for those of you who don't know, so you'd be amazed with how young some of the audience is. But Julie Baker was, of course, the principal flutist of the New York Philharmonic, and was there along with one of our other guests, Stanley Drucker, of course, and was, of course, a very prominent flute teacher and a wonderful flute player. So that takes me to the next step with you, Eddie. The first time I came to Hong Kong was 1987. It was the Juilliard Orchestra touring Asia. We were the first conservatory orchestra to actually tune in China, and they brought some of the faculty along. You remember Dorothy DeLay was there giving math classes on violin, Itzhak Perlman's teacher, and so forth. And Julie Baker was the woodwind guy. And so we stopped in Japan, and I guess at one point, or roughly at this point in the 80s, you were playing Yamaha. I'm going to say, okay.
Yeah.
So was he. So anyway, we had a day off in Japan before we moved on, and Baker walks up to me. He goes, "You're a clarinetist, aren't you?" I say, "Yeah, of course." He says, "Listen, I just visited the Yamaha guys, whatever," and he said they were playing this really cool jazz clarinet album called Breakthrough, okay, with Eddie Daniels. Okay, so we're going to segue. But more importantly, this is a more profound. And by the way, I mean, I could go on and on about this. I remember 1985 watching you in Pittsburgh playing a clarinet convention and talking about, oh, I'm about to do this album called Breakthrough. But it's actually more profound than you think where I'm going with this, because Paquito has a similar show to mine, actually. And Anat Cohen was on his, and they were both guests of mine. And both of them, we were talking, and they were talking with themselves about the evolution of the clarinet getting back as a, quote, legitimate jazz instrument. I mean, of course, there was the Betty Goodman era and stuff. And, you know, Anat, it was lovely. She says, you know, I got sick of apologizing, you know, for being a clarinetist. And in her case, she found the churros. And in Paquito's case, he said John Faddis told him he was going out with his clarinet. He goes, "Where's your sax?" Like, he was kind of pissed off. But he said Dizzy Gillespie encouraged him to get back in the clarinet. And Paquito documents on both interviews that the entire evolution of the clarinet becoming a more legitimate jazz instrument is because of Breakthrough. He says Breakthrough changed the entire landscape of where the clarinet belongs. Do you want to comment a little about? And first of all, why don't we talk a little bit about the album? How it's classically connected and all that. And tell us a little about that.
Well, it was on GRP, which is Grusin and Rosen, Larry Rosen, Dave Grusin, who's on my latest album, by the way, called Night Kisses, the music of Ivan Lins. I play clarinet and tenor and flute on it. And so they had a record company called GRP. I'd go up and talk to Dave, went up to the studio, and they'd be hiring me actually to do solos on some of their other records. You know, Angel in the Night is Angela Bofill, famous tenor solo I did on one of the. So I'd be one of the studio guys, they'd bring me in and I'm playing solos on their albums. That's another one, Angel in the Night, I Cry. That's another tenor solo that I did on her album that you could look up. And it's really beautiful. She sounds so great. And it's another one. And so I'd be showing stuff to Dave, and Dave said, we want to record you. You know, we want to record you on GRP. And we want to record you in London with a symphony, but kind of a jazzy mixture. And Calandrelli, who was a friend of mine and also of Ettore Strata, who produced that album and wrote some beautiful music, gave me this open ticket to do an album that would be with orchestra, and we get great arrangers to write some of the arrangements, and it was an amazing time to go to London, and it was cheaper at that time because you could book an orchestra for a recording. It was half the price of doing it in the States. So yeah, it was. I think it shocked a lot of people because I'm playing, you know, solfeggetto, fast stuff, and then Siciliano with the harp and all this beautiful stuff, and then improvising. It was my way of connecting the legit sound to the jazz sound of my voice. And you could even go on YouTube and listen to Siciliano from that, and you'll get a chance to hear it. I mean, it was just exciting, you know. Oh God, you know, was it exciting? But to be able to play like the concerto for jazz clarinet that Jorge Calandrelli wrote for me with an orchestra, and you only got like 6 hours to do 3 movements with a full orchestra jazz rhythm section, maybe not even that much, and you have to get it done. And I remember we were struggling with it, and I said, let's put a click track on so that I could go da 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 da, and the whole orchestra, because they're not jazz players, but they're playing their parts very precisely, but still the groove of it was not really exact. And so I had them do a click track to it, and so there's that stress. Oh God, we got to get this done. And then I remember in the editing of the concerto, back then it wasn't digital, so we got cuts of tape all over the floor in a studio control room with markings on it. Oh, I like that solo. That was good on the second take. We didn't do a lot of takes, but, you know, let's use that part. And there was an out-of-tune note there, and, you know, and there's pieces of tape that they're gluing back together, splicing back together to make it come together as one whole. And it came together quite well. Sometimes I listened to it and I said, how did I do that? You know, how can I? But if I had to do it again, I would do it. You know, if somebody says, you do this, I think we all need an assignment from somebody above us who can see, because we get into our own little lazy doldrums. And if somebody comes along who's really a great composer, if Lenny Bernstein, if he was still here, and said, I'm writing a concerto for you, Eddie. I don't care if you're 79. You're going to play it in 2 weeks and you're going to know it. I would know it, you know, and we all would do that. All of us would just jump on it. And we love that. We love that thing of, oh God, I got to do it. Which also makes me think of Thad Jones and Mel Lewis, whose band I was in after Juilliard. Thad, you know, it's part of my jazz heritage of being in probably the best big band that ever was at the Village Vanguard on Monday nights. And Thad, before the recording, which could be, we do a Monday night and we have to be in the studio Tuesday morning. So we're playing till 1 o'clock in the evening, late, 1 o'clock in the morning at the Vanguard. We're wiped out. And a lot of crowds then. It was very popular. And then we'd have to get up at 10 o'clock call to be in town. And I didn't live in Manhattan at the time. So we all had to be at the studio at 10 o'clock. What was Thad doing at 2 in the morning? He was writing the charts live, transposed with copyists looking over his shoulder as he's writing some of the classic great jazz big band stuff that you've ever heard. Thad Jones wrote because he had, he had someone that said, this is your assignment. You're recording your own big band and you've got to have it in the studio tomorrow. And a lot of those guys like Thad, they didn't want to write 3 weeks before. That's too easy. I'll have too much time. I'll think about it too much. So 2 in the morning, he's writing transposed parts for 5 saxes, E flat, B flat, baritone, alto, soprano parts, trumpet parts, you know, piano parts, bass parts, while the copyists are copying it live over his shoulder, and he didn't make any mistakes. You know, so my point is, it's so great to have somebody you trust who's a great composer who just says, you got to do this now. I'm giving you a time limit and you've got to do it. And you love music and your heart just jumps, you know?
Well, my question to you, I mean, the more you're talking about when you were in New York, I mean, you go in, you don't know what's happening. Oh, right, alto saxophone. Oh, that's this one, right? Okay, Sister Sledge. Yeah. At night, you're playing in Thad Jones doing there. Oh, by the way, I'm playing my own gig up here. Oh, right, Mozart Quintet, you know. So my question to you is, first of all, is there any part of you that's a snob? Is there any part of you that say, wait a minute, you know, I love jazz, I love classical, I love it, but no, I don't play that kind of music. Is there anything that you would just say, look, I'm
not at all.
Everything.
I'm basically, the only music I don't particularly love, and I'm Jewish, is klezmer music. Because I don't, and I played it at weddings. I used to play weddings and bar mitzvahs and stroll the tables and play very, very klezmer stuff. And I wanted, going to Juilliard, to find a more beautiful sound in the music that I wanted to play. And so, and, you know, I know people who do that well. You know, Anat can probably do that really, really well. No, I'm almost open to anything as long as I can make a nice tone. It's all about a nicer tone. You got to make a nicer tone. When you make a nice tone on the instrument, whether it's a G that's part of an F chord or a G flat chord or whatever that G is going to be, if the sound is beautiful, you feel good about it. And if the notes then are really pretty, and then you even feel better. So there's no limit, you know. Well,
okay, but before we go on, as I said, Anat, she was apologizing. She said, you know, I'm sick of apologizing for the clarinet. And she found churros, Brazilian music. Yeah. And of course, they both of them are quite versatile. And Paquito, you know, obviously had the Cuban root. So we forced them to play something from their background. Now, my first question to you is there some kind of music, as much as you love it all, as good as you are at all these styles, is there some music it's just home base for you?
Well, I love my latest album, the music of Ivan Lins, is a Brazilian album. The album before that was a music of Egberto Gismonti, was a brilliant Brazilian album, churros, all the tunes that they had written. And not that I am a specialist in churros specifically. I'm a specialist in I love the rhythm because in New York, another part of my life is I used to do a lot of Latin gigs, you know, where I play with this great trombonist, Barry Rogers, and we'd go do these Latin gigs. And, you know, up on 86th Street or 96th Street, these dance halls, Latin bands. And so I got a feeling for Latin music, you know, really subtly, actually. And I'll tell this little story that one summer in the Catskills, actually, it was in New Hampshire. I was playing with Barry Rogers, and he's the trombone player. I'm the sax player in the band, and we decided he'd give me trombone lessons, and I'd give him sax lessons. So I took to the trombone. I got a trombone natural chop and jaw. The end of the summer, I started doing second trombone to Barry Rogers on really good Latin gigs. Eddie Palmieri, Charlie Palmieri. And so that fall, Barry calls me and said, would you go to Puerto Rico playing the trombone with the La Playa Sextet? And I said, yeah, because I was into the trombone that summer. I just kind of loved it. So I went to Puerto Rico and played trombone and played this kind of jazz that Barry was playing, the trombone, and this kind of Latin-y jazz with the La Playa Sextet. And Puerto Rico was quite a place back then. It was, in better shape than it is now. So that's part of I have this Latin love for Latin music and jazz and tone and the clarinet and the tenor. It's all one for me. It's like when I, speak a voice, I want it to just come out of me and flow out. But it has to flow out with a nicer tone and good technique and all the stuff that I learned from Jimmy Abato and him putting his feet up and Bonad and, all of that. It has to have all those elements.
Eddie, I also know that you're like two, and I want to say two of our previous guests, Stanley Drucker and Paquito de Rivera, when we talked about what's kind of missing and what they'd like to see more of is articulation, good articulation, how important it is in both jazz and classical. And I know you're a big proponent. Tone first, articulation second, right? Very important.
Yeah.
But we have Maury back. You yourself said you spent all this time trying to get your clarinet in repair. Maury went to town, and we need you to play something for us. We want to put pressure on you to play something. Why don't you play something from your recent album, especially if it connects so well with you?
It's a little bit too difficult, but you know.
Okay, anything that makes you comfortable. All right. Woo! Okay. And Weber thanks you, by the way.
We call that blues in the kitchen.
Good, yeah, and I can tell. I mean, you really just hate playing that stuff. I mean, it's thanks so much. It was like pulling teeth for you. You know, I know.
I was champion at the.
Yeah, and thank you, Maury, for helping him online so that he could give us this wonderful COVID gem when we're all sitting home. Yeah.
He's the glue on this mouthpiece, you know.
Perfect. But listen, Eddie, I know that you actually have a big respect for some of the old guys like Benny Goodman. You mentioned in particular you love the way he swings. Okay, you love the way he swings. But now my question to you is, in 75 years or whatever, okay, when the next Benny Goodman or Eddie Daniels, the next really hotshot jazzer comes along, what would you like them to say about you? What do you think they'll say about you? Benny Goodman, you admire his swing. What do you think they'll? What is it about Eddie Daniels that his legacy?
Heart. The music has heart. It's not showing off. Although I showed off a little then, because I know you're all listening. So
yeah, Maury Baccoon got mad. You didn't have enough whole notes in there, by the way. He wanted to show off his new pad or whatever, Maury. Come on.
And I love it when somebody, might hear something that I did that I thought was true to me, and people have said they've pulled their car over off of the highway, and it changed got them out of their depression. That's, a couple of particular people said they were kind of depressed, and then they heard the sound and they heard something in my approach that healed them in some way. And so, in fact, I did a record with Bob James. What's that record called? Anyway, it's got beautiful tunes on it and very heartfelt. And Bob said he had a friend who was in the hospital and really, really sick, and he would play that record, and it got him to heal himself, And so, that if I can help somebody feel good, and especially if they're not really feeling well, and make them their energy, because I'm always working with my own energy. When I'm not feeling good, if I pick up the clarinet, it always makes me feel better. Always. So if I can make somebody else feel better, yeah, all the way. Great.
Now, you're actually, I mean, not only you're obviously a big goal of yours and successful, you're a communicator when you play, but I also noticed on a lot of your videos, your interviews, the way you talk when you play concerts, you're actually quite a good verbal communicator also. And I'm just curious about where teaching is in your life right now, because you talk about people coming to. I mean, do you have regular students? Do you have people that come for a day? I mean, what is that sort of side to you like?
Well, we didn't have COVID. I would do call it the Eddie Retreat on my website, EddieDanielsClarinet.net. I don't go to it that often, but people wanted to come to New Mexico. It's not a cheap thing. You got to get in a plane. You got to rent a motel, and they have to be here for 4 days so that I make them write a diary, and we kind of go through things. And but not a ton of it. I do like teaching, though. I do enjoy it. I have one student now that I'm teaching online, and it's a lot of fun. Except I don't like the sound online. Maybe I think your platform is a lot better than Zoom or Facebook or FaceTime. How does the clarinet come through? I'm just playing into my computer. I don't have any.
It sounded terrible. I can't even. I'm kidding. It sounded great.
It's a clarinet.
It's fine. It sounds great. It sounds great. So, in your teaching, obviously you've listened to just so many players worldwide, and I know you give. I remember once you gave what they called a clinic, and you started. And I watched it in one of these clarinet conferences. You said, "Look, I hate this word clinic. I feel that everyone needs health insurance. It sounds like it's some kind of." But I know you do a lot of that. What are the kind of tendencies as a teacher that you've noticed? I mean, through now generations of younger players that you'd like to see people pay more attention to, and that you gravitate to as a teacher?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking about jazz students or classical students.
Whatever you teach. Whatever you teach. Yeah.
Well, I can only impart what I know that works for me, which doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for them. But, articulation is so important. Articulation. But as you said, if you don't have a good sound, articulation means nothing. If you're going to tongue and the sound is the sound has to be a tone that has a center and a focus, and then that's the sound that when you tongue the reed that comes out, it's just shorter. It's a shorter piece of bologna. You cut it into a shorter piece. And I try to use my creativity, and sometimes I bore myself. So, and one of the things I like to do with more classical players is show them the harmony in the music they're playing, because most classical players, they play the notes and they can play them great, but they don't really know what the harmony, we were talking about Tom Nyfinger, and I studied flute with him. And, one of the great genius flute players of all time, he passed away a couple of years ago. And I had to play the Mozart with the London Symphony, the London Philharmonia Orchestra. And I was scared, of course, because I didn't do it every week. And Tom came over and played the piano without even reading the music. He knew the whole accompaniment from having heard it, could play it at the piano. So when you have somebody who...
Mozart clarinet concerto or flute?
No, clarinet. It was a clarinet concerto. We were friends. Yeah. He knew all the sides of me. And I studied flute with him. But this was a clarinet gig, and I said, what should I do? My buddy Ron said you should study with Marcellus. I thought Marcellus was a wonderful, wonderful player, but a little too regimented and tight for me. I'm a looser kind of player. I wanted somebody with a different kind of head. And so Tom said, I'll do it. I'll come over and I'll coach you. And he did. He played the piano and he gave me ideas. And I went and played with the London Symphony, and he had given me good preparation and a good feeling. So when I don't know the harmony to everything, but for me, life is 1-5-1. Almost all the harmony of not contemporary music, but it is. You live, you're born, you live, you die. That's 1-5-1. So but on the way, you might want to go to Starbucks. So then instead of 1-5-1, you go 1 to 2 to 5 to 1. So that 2 is Starbucks, but you still go to 5 and you come back to 1. And then maybe after Starbucks you want to go meet a friend. So then you go 1 to 2 to 5 to 3 to 6 to 2 to 5 to 1. So you have all these harmonies, and the kind of how they go and kind of how they work. And so it's different when you see a melody. The melodies, especially, not super contemporary music, the melody is hinting at what the harmony is. And then you play with the piano and you find out, I was right most of the time. That is kind of what the harmony I'm hearing. So when you play a note, if you play a note and you're playing a B natural on the clarinet, and it's a concert F7, that B natural is the third of the chord in our G7 going maybe to C or maybe to A minor. So you treat that sound of that B in a different way. It's not just the B, and a lot of great players don't know any harmony and they sound great. But I think to know where that B, and if that B is going to go to the relative minor like A minor instead of, you got the B dot, B going to C, and it's going to C, but it's in A minor. That's a whole different feeling in your body, and that harmony. So I try to work. I feel that that's maybe the contribution I can give to the classical players about how to treat what that note really where it wants to go and why.
Great. And just, I was also a student of Thomas Nightfinger, and I don't know how much he has up in YouTube and stuff, but please, this guy was a very, very special musician, and I think there's a lot to learn for anybody. So thanks for mentioning him, Eddie. Now, I want to ask you, and you know what? I usually ask people how to give encouragement or your views on getting through COVID and stuff, but I'm going to be a little more positive. Things have been moving along a little bit, and maybe we won't have to. And you've been talking a lot about what it's meant to you. But what I want to know, after all this, amazingly versatile and successful career and living, from New York to Santa Fe and all this, is there anything you would tell the 20-year-old Eddie Daniels? Any words of wisdom? You said you've worked on personal growth and therefore your musical growth. What would you advise him, if you could talk to the 20-year-old Eddie Daniels?
It depends what instrument. What instrument would you...
No, doesn't matter. Could be about his relationship with his friend. Anything. What do you look back at 20 and you say, I wish he had done this, or don't worry about that, go this way, or nothing?
Well, I got to hear the guy and see what I feel I have to say. There are a lot of young players when I hear the saxophone.
Sorry. Tone. Yourself, Eddie Daniels, at 20 years old. Anything you would do differently, or something you thought you did particularly well?
So generally,
yes.
And Eddie Daniels, like me at 20, I would say slow down,
So,
Or maybe too, we're all the results of everything that's gone through us. And if I've always been a meditator. I meditated when I was 20. So, hey, Zena, that's our German Shepherd.
beautiful.
Zena Marie. So what would I say to myself? Well, we all work on ourselves in certain ways, and I think that I did it right, and I still failed at ways that we want to get somewhere, and I'm intense, and I'm still doing the same thing that I did when I was 20. I'm working on some of the same things. I'm working on my fingers, on my tone, on my articulation. The good thing about being older is that the expression becomes more personal. I don't play as fast for the sake of fast. When I hear some earlier Eddie Daniels stuff, solos with Thad Jones, and there's one of me and Joe Henderson playing this fast thing, and I'm playing too fast, I say, relax. Can you relax a little bit and slow it down? And that's what I'm telling myself now. So I am this 20-year-old Eddie Daniels in an older body, talking to myself, saying the same thing. Slow down.
Great.
In fact, while practicing today, I can play things fast right away. And then I realize the brain cannot make changes unless it has time to really assess what you want to do. So I'm playing something on flute this morning where there's intervals, and I'm playing them, they're coming out okay. And I say, play them more slowly, because if you play them slower, your brain can then adjust the message to your lips, because you want this sound to be a little bit better. So if you slow it down, your brain is giving you the message. If you play too fast, your brain is not going to get the message. So you then soak up where you want it to go by let your brain see the canvas more. That's what I would say, and that's what I keep doing. That's what I do.
Eddie, normally I would end the interview here, but just I'm going to indulge myself because we're at the end of 28 episodes, and I think you'll go with me here. I want to confirm. I remember you were quite into tennis at one point. Are you still into tennis at all? Do you watch tennis? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I watch tennis. Living in Santa Fe has been a tennis haven for me. But I had a few shoulder injuries, and then it was hard to raise the flute because I had cartilage so I had a thing called a cleanup where they took the cartilage out. It was an overnight quick procedure. And my coach is calling me and said, come on, you got to get back on the court. But I don't want to mess up the shoulder because I hold my instruments. And, all of us have over years and years and years held a clarinet with this thumb and, holding the instrument, and we have little injuries that come out. So at this point, I'm saying I'm practicing more music and not running out on the tennis court. I don't want to hurt the shoulder.
Okay, so what I want to ask you, we actually had a kind of off the beaten track interview before. We had Vanya King, the 2010 doubles Wimbledon and U.S. Open champion, for a whole hour talking about. Yeah, so I'm putting in a plug for you to listen to it. And we had a bunch of trumpeters, principal of Chicago, Cleveland, and they met talking about performance under pressure. So I want to know, we just talked about inner game of tennis and stuff. What are, very quickly, some of the similarities and differences of that you've gotten from tennis and music? What are some of the similarities you find and some of the differences?
Well, in tennis, in the serve, you can double fault, or you get a second serve. You come out on stage and you have to play a high F pianissimo. You don't get a second time. You say, oh, I'm sorry, it squeaked. I'm going for my second serve on my high F. There is no second serve. And, but it's still the same kind of, it's a very rigorous practice playing tennis. It's a lot of fun. I don't know what else to say about that. I think playing music is harder. Although we have the melody, and you're not competing. But when you play tennis, you're competing with someone. You got other people. Winning is what's important rather than playing a beautiful game. In music, winning is not important, although you want a good review. You do want a good review in the papers the next day, but it's not about winning. I think if we could come back in ourselves and say, we're not competing with anyone when we come out and play, you can only be yourself. So you just have to be good at being yourself when you go play and have all the stuff you've learned from hours and hours. You've done your 10,000, you know, that book where you 10,000 hours, The Outliers is the name of that book. And I mean, all of us here that are, you know, who have done these interviews we've had hundreds of thousands of hours. 10,000 is nothing. You know, when you get into your 50s and 70s and 80 years old, you've got hundreds of thousands of hours and you still practice.
Great.
And then maybe you don't care so much about what other people think of you. You know?
Fantastic. Listen, Eddie, we're just so everyone knows, we're ending the series now, but we're also going to have a little coda. We've invited some of our illustrious past guests, and we're just going to reminisce a little bit and talk behind the scenes. So, Eddie, I can't thank you enough. This has been a fantastic finale to the series. Everyone really enjoyed it. You can just read the comments for yourself. Now, I do know some of these guys are old acquaintances and friends. So if you want to, just for 90 seconds, we'll bring some of them on, and you can say hello and wish them a happy New Year. Okay? So here's a clip of yours, Frank Cohen.
Hey, Frank. How you doing?
Oh, Frank, you got to unmute. You got to unmute, man.
Is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, here you go.
Eddie, you look great.
Yeah,
I love hearing you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You know,
and I have to tell you, when we were in Juilliard together, we were in Juilliard at the same time. I was a grad student, and you came in your first year at Juilliard, and you were the golden boy. You got to play in every ensemble, and I was so jealous. And you played your butt off, you know, and I just thought, well, maybe when I get out in the world, I'll get a chance to do what I really want to do. But that was a very difficult scene in Juilliard at that time. And you played it. You got to play in the orchestra as a new person coming in there. And I was, you know, in my middle 20s getting a master's degree. So I didn't have a chance to get exposure as much as you did. So I was jealous.
Eddie, your interview was brilliant.
We've got Michelle Zukovsky here. We've got Charlie Neidig and Ayaka. We've got John Ye.
John.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. Oh my
God. Charlie.
Hi.
I love it. Hey, John.
All alumni.
Hey. Fantastic.
Hey, Michelle, I still have the same part. When I play the Copeland, you signed my Copeland and you gave me your phone number to call, you know, to just as a friend. And so I still have the same part with your signature and phone number on my Copeland when I play it. So there you go.
Is it 323-467-07?
All right, I'll send you
It could have been my dating service.
Fantastic. Eddie, thank you so much. We're going to go on now to our coda, but a terrific interview, and thank you so much for joining us and playing for us.
And thank you. Thank you guys.
You've done awesome. You're an inspiration.
Take care, Eddie. Yeah. I don't know.
Bye. Bye, dear.
That was brilliant. That was brilliant.
Great.
Fantastic.
I'm glad. Well, all you guys were, and you know, as I've said to earlier, a lot of the early interviews, we really learned a lot. We're just going to talk a little bit about the evolution of the show, about marketing and posters and platforms and technology, and people have noticed that. So some of you guys, you had a big impact, but we really want people who didn't sort of know about the show to get a second chance. So probably in about a month or two, we're going to start playing from the beginning to the end. And I really highly encourage, especially Charlie and Frank, were really early on.
Very much in the beginning, yeah.
Yes, well, yeah, and I really encourage you guys to. I mean, it's all online. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. At the time, it wasn't. And if you don't have a chance, just they'll have these live interviews. Showed live, and I highly encourage them. They were really, really special. So John had the benefits of a little bit better technology, and he set the record at 3 minutes, 3 hours, 1.5 minutes or something until we got to the trumpets, and we still could have gone another 2 hours, I think.
Hey, what do you think about that? That's my question.
Okay, so I just want to ask Charlie again. Great to see you, but as the interviews evolved, we had spouses pretty much by accident show up. One was Rainer Vele, with Sabina Meyer's husband, of course, Teresa over there, John Ye's wife, and very, very touching, Naomi Drucker finishing the interview on a 91-year-old Stanley Drucker's lap and going away. And we were really happy. But of course, Ayako, you're probably the spouse I know the most. I've been, musically influenced by. Even Steve Williamson, one of our guests, referred to both you and Charlie as influences. So I'm really happy. I apologize in retrospect. Of course, you should have had a appearance. So, but I want to ask you a question now. I've known Charlie forever as well. And what I said to him at the end of the interview was, it's always an amazing experience because I think I know all these things about him. And as I said in the interview, I've learned 30 to 40% more about him. Okay. So yes. So anyway, Ayako, yeah, you remember his interview, and I remember you posted something on one of the, oh, these guys are talking forever. It was. Did you actually learn anything? Is there anything that you didn't know about Charlie that he mentioned in the interview? Can you remember that far back? This is like May or something.
I don't.
Hey, I've never asked you a question.
Too far back, actually, really, right. I don't remember what he said.
You're gonna have to go back and listen to the interview again.
Yeah.
Put it back again, and you should have told me that I could learn that and then earlier today. I should have.
I love putting people on the spot. It's not in my nature.
I don't know what.
But it was all stream of consciousness anyway. So
yes, very much so, very much so. And I'd like to ask Ayako, you've been on quite all these guests here. Have certainly seen several episodes. So I'm very curious. Are there any memorable moments that? Not necessarily from Charlie's, but and what I'm very curious about are any commonalities that you sort of themes that the people would say or memorable moments. Anything you want to add? Anything you've observed from the what you've seen?
I would like to say,
that
it's no surprise that all these people, with the exception of me, have been exceedingly successful, because I hear in all cases a brilliant mind behind the music, behind the creative impulses. And just Eddie's, for example, but Charlie and John Bruce and Michelle and everybody else. There's such depth to the brains of all these people. As I said, I exclude myself.
Oh, come on.
I can't keep, my brain is like a sieve. Something goes in. But it's been so inspiring, Andy, and I want to congratulate you. This has been an amazing series, and you get the absolute best out of everyone. And I've learned so much that I wish I could sort of go back and do it all over again, with much more information and with much more wisdom. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Frank. Yours was really a very special interview, and again, I'm looking forward to broadcasting it again to everyone. Michelle, now she was a very, very interesting one because, first of all, she's one of the few guests that I really didn't know. I met her once as a groupie. Like, I think Rushinoff took me to hear her play chamber music when I was like 18. That's about the only time I met her. And I'm really sorry. I've known you guys for like 30, 40 years, but you've all been replaced. She's my new best friend, okay? And we've been in touch for like 5 times a day with inner secrets and outer secrets and everything. So she's been spectacular. But her interview was so special because people were writing in like, I just want to be friends with her. And it actually was a turning point.
Wow, they didn't want to take a lesson. That sucks. They just want to be friends, and I don't know their names anything.
Actually, that's not true. She actually ended up teaching some of my students online who loved it, and we started doing some teaching projects together. That Naldo put us in touch. He's the gentleman to her right and our left. He's a Brazilian student. Oh, here we go. The famous team.
James Prendergast. There he is. He stole the show from Michelle.
Is he vacuuming? What's he doing? He's vacuuming.
Oh my gosh.
So, this was, people wrote it. First of all, we noticed. Lorenzo, what
Oh my God, I was so tempted to vacuum during this interview. I've been looking at this crumb on the floor the whole time. And Jim,
people noticed
I should have taken the chance.
There's so here. Let me read this letter. This comes from George Stoffen. George Stoffen, a teacher he wrote in before this, a teacher in LA. So he wrote, I'm sorry to hear about the end of the series. I understand it's difficult to sustain. And he goes on and lists what it meant to him and why he thought it was successful. These will become an important part of a historical record of not only the great clarinetists and musicians of an era, but previous generations and a unique documentation of tradition. I've learned a lot about myself, but by the way, these are all people who've seen every episode. I've learned a lot about myself, but I've also found myself using some of this information lessons in my clarinet literature class, where I talk about some of these figures and refer to these students. I'm continually surprised how college students don't know much about some of the legends of our crafts, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, he says, love the insight into your guests' lives and to get to know them as people. As I have written, the effect of how you conducted these conversations was that we were actually there too, in on it all. One of my favorite moments has nothing to do with anything I've written so far. There was a moment late in your interview when Michelle Zukoski, where her husband walks in and she says something to the effect of, Jim, what the hell are you doing? You here. I'm almost done. And you and Lorenzo burst into laughter, and I did too. It was such a moment. I love this part that we all can relate to in this COVID Zoom era. You know, so I think that was part of this experience. For me, my favorite moment with Jim was, by the way, Lorenzo keeps, this is as we evolved, we kept, we saw what was interesting to people, what wasn't interesting. And here we were talking. I mean, Michelle's was one of the most historic interviews. You know, she played Copeland with Copeland. She studied it with Benny Goodman. She played with Stravinsky. And the husband walks in, and the numbers just spiked. Like, they couldn't care less about it. But for me, one of the funniest moments was when you were talking about Stravinsky or something, and he shouts, tell them about what it was like to work with Brahms, right? And you were completely serious. You were terrified that people thought you were so old that you worked with Brahms. And you know, I never worked with Brahms. Like, you needed to clarify that for the audience. I loved it. But also, she helped evolve the series because Gudrun Verlitzer contacted me and asked my permission to actually download her interview, and they created a news page in English just for the interviews, starting with hers, which was so interesting. Well, P.S. I mean, if you get on YouTube, you cannot find a single English language interview with Sabina Meyer. You cannot find a single internet interview with Sabina Meyer. This is, 40-year career, and you can't really find any interview more than 2 or 3 minutes. So she just doesn't like English interviews. She just doesn't like internet interviews. My orchestra, even, she was going to play, said, can you please do it? No, I'd really rather not. I talked to her agent. No, I'd really rather not. And out of nowhere, 3 or 4 weeks later, they contact me. Rainer Bailey contacted me. Said, we actually saw Michelle's interview, and it was so fun. It's like nothing else. Can we do one? And so now we actually have a 85-minute documented English internet interview, all because yours was so entertaining and also had its profundities, everything. So it's just been tremendous. Have you noticed? I noticed you've been on a lot of these shows, making comments, usually in a unfriendly time zone. Later, any commonalities you've seen or highlights or memorable moments?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking you, Michelle.
You know what I wanted to say is you brought us all together once a week or whatever, and we were able to forget a lot of unhappy things. People dying. Actually, I had COVID too, by the way, but I'm here. I'm stronger, evidently, than somebody else in this area. And we were able to forget, we were able to forget for two hours, and in John's case, 3 hours. and even with the politics, and John and I are very involved in politics. I suspect Charlie is too. So, I wasn't angry for 3 hours, I didn't just go up, right on Facebook.
Well, in the case, I just want to say in the case of Charlie, because I can actually, we mentioned Tom Nightfinger, I can actually say Charlie's probably, he's probably the biggest musical influence on me, a living influence. Tom Nightfinger was certainly one of them, but his interview in terms of the show and other projects that we've been doing was really terrific, because I asked him, what can we do? I mean, all these young people and so forth are discouraged during this period. And he said, we must be proactive. Okay. And I really took that to heart. And I've mentioned a few times in the interviews. And I do want to say, for those of you who don't know, hopefully you do know, he actually has really backed it up because he has a really terrific sort of weekly talk really about everything, but it all starts always with 5 or 10 minutes of a very, very well researched, well thought out kind of talk about current affairs from COVID to politics, whatever. And it's quite profound, and of course he has this sort of encyclopedic knowledge of clarinet and music. He just never runs out of things. So it's 10 a.m. New York time on Fridays, right, Charlie?
Yes.
I'm getting all my time zones.
You don't have your 5 o'clock shadow yet. That's good.
But again, it's too long.
What's too long?
He speaks so long.
No.
Fascinating. Everything that Charlie says, I hang on. It's just amazing.
Yeah, he's very. And what I wanted to say is, we've actually discussed it. We're actually kind of at opposite ends, probably because I'm not as well researched, but he actually, with all the crazy news and sources that you get, he sort of is this sort of rock of reliable knowledge about the week's events, and you can go and tune in, and he'll talk about it, maybe too long, Ayako says, but quite interesting and well researched. And I, on the opposite, just thought, okay, listen, the one thing that we do have in common is music, the clarinet. Let people like Charlie talk about it. Let's just forget about it. Let's talk about what we have in common and talk about the clarinet. So it's been really, I've really kind of enjoyed. In fact, our time slot, which today we're not true to, is because of Charlie, because I asked him to do it during his show, and then we moved it to Saturday. So anyway, please, everyone, if you haven't, they're all on Facebook and whatnot. You can hear them all in retrospect. He has some, really, really interesting interviews and talks. Sorry. And one thing I actually wanted to talk about with him, and probably less directly with us, is you can actually kind of monitor the evolution, the historical events of this year by listening to our show. So, for example, in my case, you'll hear me talking about, the orchestra's getting back to playing in May and we're going this direction. And all of a sudden, 2 months later, no, we're shut down again. And now, Wenzel Fuchs is up doing this, or the Chicago Symphonies do this. You can actually see the evolution of COVID and how it's affected the world. You can also see the evolution of clarinet news. I mean, obviously that unfortunate week that we lost our colleagues in the Met, Jim Onyeabene and Joe Rabai, we had a little memorial to them, and you can see that. You can see in Anthony McGill's literally at the peak of all the the George Floyd things and the Black Lives Matter, all that going on, and talking about that. So you can actually kind of go through these episodes. And with Charlie, I mean, literally every week, for the first 5 or 10 minutes, you can actually sort of trace back in 25 years from now how everything kind of happened this year or didn't happen this year, so I think that's quite interesting. So Anyway, thank you so much, Charlie and Ayako. Frank, you were awesome. Michelle, yeah, what can I say? We're now going to go to Janye, who is one of the only people. Some people have taken me to task when I said this. He has been a live viewer for every single minute of every single episode. Okay, so we're really going to delve with him. I mean, he's a diehard, and we literally, I've told him I'd be heartbroken if he couldn't make one, because I literally view him as like the third interview. I mean, he makes about first of all, every time someone forgets a name, he gets right on. You know, he just knows.
Psycho memory. Yeah.
It's just the luck of the draw, Andy. I happen to be available all the time when your show is on, and I can't say I wish I were when Charlie's show is on. I attend Charlie's show when I can, but I usually have stuff to do on Friday morning. I have my Pilates lesson on Friday morning. So it's like it's a scheduling thing. And I always tell people my major challenge in life is scheduling. And you've made it easy for me this year because, well, I mean, you know, a lot of circumstances have made it easier, but I just happen to be able to have been available to watch and participate in all of these amazing shows. And you've done an incredible service to not only clarinetists, but to musicians and people all over the world by bringing us all together during this time. And I've honestly gotten to know people more this year than I have, you know, in 4 decades in the past. You know, a lot of people that have been on your show that I've maybe met once or twice, I've gotten to know so well just because of your interview. And a lot of them, the European players, for example, like Alessandro and Paul Mayer and Michael Collins, and I've met these people, but I know them. You know, Philippe, even, you know, Charlie and I were at Munich with Philippe back in 1982. I didn't know him really, you know, until your interview, and it's just so it's so amazing that you've been able to bring everybody together and elicit the responses that allow us to know each other. And so, Andy, I mean, you're a hero. Yes, you're our hero. Totally. I'm not even kidding. Plus, you are a musician and a performing musician too. I mean, to do all the musical at such a high level, all the musical performances and, you know, educational things around Hong Kong. I don't know how you can do it. I mean, you're an organizational genius. Of course, you got Lorenzo to help you, and and all the things I've been seeing from Hong Kong performance-wise. I mean, your orchestra, the chamber music, the modern music, all of that is done so incredibly well.
That's
great. Thanks so much, John. But actually, I want to say one of the most touching things for me was when you see a half a dozen of the guests going to watch these interviews and commenting it, sometimes you almost felt like it was like a support network or a club. And then also you see it's like a clarinet event or a high school reunion. Someone will make a comment. Someone else says, "Oh, I haven't seen you since Eastman 40 years ago. How have you been doing?" They start having, you know, these conversations of catching up with each other. And, you know, it's so heartwarming. And even Frank, before his interview, I'd see him getting on some of the other people's and, you know, making comments. It felt almost like they were getting ready to train for theirs or to support the next person's or whatever. You know, so that was great. But John, let's go back to what do you think? What are some of the common themes that you noticed from 28 interviews or differences? Someone wrote in and said, "I love all the differences."
Sure.
There's a lot of variety.
There is a lot of variety, as Teresa says, and it's wonderful to get to know the people on a personal level that maybe you know professionally or you know musically as performers, but just to get a little bit of the personal insight into, for example, their earliest influences. I think that's so valuable to know, and it brings me closer. So, I mean, just for an example, Martin first. Okay, so I've seen him perform. I've met him, on occasion. But just to hear about all his, early training and his foundations, and his doing conducting, and then the same thing about Michael Collins, to hear him how early he got started, and Paul Mayer, how early these people got their initial immersion into music, and how they came to where they are. I think all of that has been individual but common in a way. We found out through your eliciting responses how our colleagues have made their careers and their lives. And I think that's such an invaluable service. I mean, where else can you do that? Where else can you find those resources in one now? I mean, I've just, I go back and think, you say there are 28 interviews. I mean, it's so much information and interest that I hang on every word that comes out that you elicit from our colleagues, and I think it makes me a more interesting musician, because I know more about the people that do the same thing or do slightly different things, or participate in our. So this has been an incredible silver lining to the Corona cloud. I mean, Corona has changed our life, so drastically, but I think this is one way that it's changed our life for the better, that we've been able to connect. I mean, these are connections, and that's what music is all about, but really making connections and communicating with people. And I think in a way, this musical conversation has been so rich. And
it's interesting. Lorenzo and I, actually, he was the first person. It all started basically when your colleague and someone who's played a lot with the Hong Kong Philharmonic, David Cooper, started doing these fireside chats. He contacted me and said, "Look, I'm doing one with Steve Williamson and John Ye. Why don't you tune in?" And I thought, "Oh, these are pretty interesting." And I mentioned to Lorenzo, because why?
Okay, because of course you all know him. He talks every day, hours, about climate change and everybody in the world. And during the COVID, I used to meet him every 2-3 days just to play together. And at one point I just said, "Andy, but why you just don't do a show? Like you know everybody, so many information. Just put online. I will prepare the structure, the logo, I will do the poster, but you talk and you interview all these great, amazing players." And yeah, this is what happened.
Oh,
well, it was a great idea, and you executed it.
It'll take another 10 minutes now.
But don't you think that something about this COVID time, I mean, you get the intimacy of seeing people in their own environments, in their own homes. I mean, there's something really special about that. Your questions are so pointed and really interesting. But I think that there's something special about just getting to see a little window into somebody's house, the pets that come through, and it just makes everybody more relatable, and we're all needing that connection so much more because of what's going on. So I felt like you really did a great job of making a community in some ways, where it's funny, in the clarinet world, I often don't feel that community. I feel it more as like a musician's world in general, but I feel like this was a very special situation that you were able to capitalize on, I think.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people have said that just being taken into Wenzel Fuchs's garden, or Alessandro showing his carving, and so a lot of people getting to see watching Jim vacuum or whatnot. A lot of people said that we have their CDs, but when do we actually get to see?
Andy,
yeah,
I did not introduce my friend Ednaldo Alves, who is a wonderful clarinet player and helped me through the technology and all that kind of stuff. I learned when I started to write, I used a quill pen and an inkwell. So,
and Naldo's been great. he put me in touch with Michelle in a way. He contacted me and he says, listen, I've been watching your interviews. I'm from Brazil. A lot of Brazilians don't speak English. I would like to add all Portuguese subtitles. Okay. And he introduced himself as Michelle Zukowski's student. I said, you know, she would be a terrific person. And he gave me your contact. So he's to blame for all this.
That's right. He's my grandson.
Good job, Ednaldo. Very good.
I just want to add some of the people who have said said some things, because this is the part that fascinates me, the commonalities. First of all, they were struck by the fact that the French players all played in this band, that it's this legitimate sort of career path of all the best known French players all seem to have one point played in the band, which Albert Nemiroff, I think, who's seen all the episodes, also the most often mentioned advice was slow down. Okay, some of the commonalities that I found: sing, find your own voice, keep the standard, and everyone, as someone mentioned before, had this love for their first teacher. Some people study with very prominent people. Some people study with people who aren't musicians anymore, but they all seem to have it. Now, Charlie and Michelle are cheating, of course, because of course they studied with their fathers, and of course they were very special to them. But I found that to be a very interesting commonality. So all, as someone has pointed out before, not everyone listening is going to be the next principal of the Berlin or the next Munich first prize winner or whatever. Some people just, they like the clarinet. They're amateurs. Your father.
So good. Oh my God.
Put it up higher.
We had a
Lift it up higher.
wonderful time to meet your father. Yeah, it was
Wait,
great.
higher.
Dad and I would go to Charlie's concerts when he played with the Guarneri's, which quartet. Anyway, we'd hear him do Brahms and Mozart, and he was kind of the standard for us. We'd drive to Pasadena, thrilled with his playing.
Wow.
Wonderful.
The Juilliards.
Was it the Juilliard Quartet?
Juilliards.
Wow.
Yeah, he played with the
And he had
Juilliards
some good
here in
taste.
Chicago.
We had to go eat in fancy restaurants and stuff afterwards. I was good for a hamburger, but not Charlie.
No, but I mean, and of course, I mean, Michelle documented. I mean, for me, it's fascinating that Benny Goodman would come to study with her father, and then Michelle would study the Copland Concerto with Benny Goodman. I mean, it's absolutely
Yeah, there's a lot of photos. I should be better than I am, But, I was never.
I stayed with you.
I love it.
That's why I'm good.
The laziest world.
And one more thing that I found, I thought it really put people on the spot, but everyone, there you go.
Oh, there it is. Benny.
Wow.
Dad was handsome in 1976.
Yeah.
So great.
Beautiful. And everyone had a silver lining to COVID. Everyone gave good advice on the spur of the moment when so many people. Sabina Meyer documented at the beginning that she and her husband are really struggling with the mood and the psyche of their students. But everyone had very quick answers and very different answers from each other, and I thought that was really fascinating. Really fascinating. People, as Frank said, in a way, I mean, they're thinkers and they're looking at, this is what I have in front of me and what am I doing with that, and what can I do to help others with that, and I thought that was extremely inspiring. And so we're actually inspired to one of these days have highlights reels. I mean, we have about 60 hours now of data, so we could literally say people's advice during COVID, probably 3-hour highlights. Don't worry, Michelle. We'll have a one just for you and Jim.
God, see them already. 47 with a comedian.
Okay, everybody. This has been a phenomenal coda. Thank you so much to all of our viewers, all the people.
Andy,
Charlie.
Thank you, and thank you, Renzo.
look at that coda.
Yeah, Charlie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, that it's your brilliance that's brought out all of this in all of us.
Huh.
I have to say.
Yeah.
It is true.
I mean, you have an amazing second career. You can interview all the big states people of the world, everything. You have a way of bringing out most interesting and also the best of all of us.
Yeah.
Wow, thank-
But Annie, your personality make us so comfortable, you know?
That's right.
Oh, good.
So that's why everybody can talk so friendly and
Relax.
yeah.
Even-
Lorenzo's laughing because he knows a few conductors that might disagree with you.
I have a couple enemies, otherwise, that's not right.
If that's the case, they deserve it. So that's
Yeah.
All everybody miss you actually.
Yeah.
You
Well, who knows? As you say, I mean, the world goes in. I think we've all learned the life goes in very unpredictable directions these days. So who knows what's in the future? But we're just very happy with this, and we have our own project coming up, and we're just so happy that everyone has given feedback. I just wanted to ask John very quickly, and then I think we've overstayed our welcome. I wanted to talk about the different ones, the off the beaten track ones. I mean, I remember you watched the tennis. I couldn't help myself. I was trying to tie in. I was dying to interview these trumpeters who I had seen an interview, and the tennis player who I had actually befriended. And I would watch their interviews, and I found this very weird connection. I had done a L'Histoire du Soldat with all of them, and put it together with the tennis player. I remember you were driving and listening, and so you didn't make much comments. That one, we had even Asma Vanska, we had John Corigliano, which you would make a guest appearance with. What else? We had the actor, Lawrence Gilliard.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
You went to Juilliard with him.
And a tribute to some of our, again, sadly, our late colleagues. And also Laurie Bloom, he didn't get a proper send-off. He had retired after X amount of years with the Chicago Symphony, and we brought him on to your thing, so he had to share the spotlight a little bit. What do you think of these kind of off the beaten track things instead of just sticking to the?
Great idea. Great idea.
It was amazing. It added a special extra dimension, and it gave insights and really incredible variety to the series. I mean, it was like to hear. Those trumpeters. I had actually known all of them, and it was just great to see, especially Mark Gould. My gosh, I played the Soldier's Tale with him like 30 years ago, and it was like just to see him again was really cool, and to hear his, he's a little bit rough, but he was, I mean, he was very, he didn't hold back. It was cool to hear.
But there's always like parallels, you always find parallels and inspiration from outside your art. I mean, it's so important to look into these other arenas.
Yeah.
It was a stroke of genius to have all of those extra people on. I mean, and Lawrence Gilliard, that was like a very that was serendipitous because you went to school with him and he's a clarinet player, and I wouldn't have known that,
But that was very, it ties in with you because John's daughter, Molly, is a very good percussionist who also went to Juilliard. In fact, we had them both play extra on Rite of Spring a million years ago with the orchestra here with the Hong Kong Phil. But also, she then went on, as Mark Gould documented, he says, I played L'Histoire with him, but now I watch his daughter on the Food Channel. So that
network. Yep.
Yeah, you had mentioned that was kind of interesting for you because you had a daughter who was that serious about music and went to Juilliard, and then was very successful, or has been very successful, outside of music and so forth. So
true. He's starting to film the 8th season of Girl Meets Farm next month.
Wow! Congratulations!
Yeah.
Oh,
great, fantastic. Okay, well, I think we've overstayed our welcome. It's so wonderful to see these old friends and Michelle, my new best friend. And
thank you, and thank you, Lorenzo, too.
Yes.
Great. So glad you're better, Lorenzo.
It's all his idea. Beautiful posters. Oh, I have to end this entire series by embarrassing him. I forgot all these posters. Did I mention that?
Yes,
I did.
You didn't do live.
Oh, okay. Only to Eddie. So as you know, these posters all have a little bit of a theme behind them. Okay. And Lorenzo said, well, what am I going to do for Eddie Daniels? So I said, well, I looked at some of the CDs I have. Well, you know, he does a tribute to Benny Goodman. He does a tribute to Charlie Parker. Maybe put little photos of them in the background. Great idea. So he sends it in the last second. And I recognized Benny Goodman, but I said, who's the other guy in the tie in the suit? He goes, Cole Porter, just like you asked me. So we had Cole Porter instead of Charlie Parker.
Charlie Parker. See, people, well, they're the same initials, right?
Same initials.
Porter, he didn't say Charlie.
Yeah, sure. Well, Charlie Parker has a tribute to Cole Porter, so we forgive it. He's very profound and knowledgeable. That's what it's all about.
Good. Very good, Lorenzo.
Great. Everyone stay as safe as possible. It seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Keep on. You guys have been so inspirational. Everyone, please take notes. When we go back, I've been taking notes. I have volumes. I mean, I've learned so much from every single interview. And, you know, to the audience who's really been supportive, people have been setting their alarm clocks at 5 in the morning, saying their marriages are in jeopardy and whatnot. Because it's okay. We appreciate it so much. It's such a great ride. And to these 4 really dear friends and wonderful artists, it's so wonderful to see you again. And I hope to see you live one day again.
Thank you so much.
Bravo.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, everybody.